For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, thank you.
You have repeatedly referred to freedom as something undergoing continuous development. What do you mean by that?
Yes, I keep on harping on this because there's a tendency for people to say in 1994 we won our freedom, full stop. And the idea is that freedom is a particular point, the terminus, which you reach at a particular moment. Now, what I am arguing in contrast to that is that freedom and democracy, I'd use them interchangeably today, although you can probably distinguish them, are constantly changing ideas and concepts in the sense that we can enrich the freedom that we have in a number of different ways. And in history, the meaning of freedom, the meaning of democracy, has not always been the same. I've referred before to the initial meaning of freedom at the time of ancient Athens was referring to direct democracy. And for many centuries after that, freedom was treated with suspicion by rulers because the idea of freedom and democracy, or democracy particularly, conjured up the idea of the mob ruling. And the people, the masses, the mob, are treated as unsavory elements who can take away all that the more cultivated classes value. And democracy only came to be treated as a value from the last century or two, especially after the American Constitution, which tried to change the meaning of democracy so that it would be treated primarily as electing representatives. So a contradiction of the original notion of freedom, which was that the people would directly govern. Now, if we look at South Africa today, we could enlarge the concept of freedom precisely in relation to the participation of people, what is called an active citizenry, but need not be exclusively citizens. The Freedom Charter, for example, says South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. It doesn't exclude foreign-born people, so that those who are experiencing attacks, foreign Africans who are experiencing continuous attacks, should really be encouraged to form associations and be part of this democracy insofar as they have made this place their home. I also think that the way in which one understands freedom is related to capacities that one has. If one is unemployed, and we have close to 40% people unemployed in this country, your capacity as a human being is impaired. Insofar as there is inequality and people do not have enough to survive and live decently, that too inhibits your freedom. Where people are schooling in conditions that are not fit for decent education, their capacities are not adequately developed, and we are creating a new future group of people who may not have had the opportunities that a free society could provide them with. So as we enlarge our capacity to provide the good things of life, which enhance people's ability to participate as active citizens. You can talk about an active citizenry, but if you do not have the knowledge of certain things, you can't be very active. So that education is very important, but people do understand that they're hungry and things like that, but they could contribute to debates on a number of different things if we expanded the extent of our education, but also the quality of that education, and built a critical component into it. So it relates to the way I would see freedom then is related to the notion of emancipation. And emancipation didn't happen just in 1865 with the emancipation of the slaves in America. You can see that the notion of emancipation continued. The civil rights struggle. Even today, people argue that they are not fully emancipated. So emancipation taken together with freedom are both concepts that are contrary to static ways of viewing people and their relationships. And we need to have a dynamic concept.
If we now live under a democratic constitution, what does this mean for this notion of a constantly developing meaning of freedom?
You see, when one speaks of the constitution, immediately one is aware of, at this time, of attacks on the constitution, undermining of the constitution, dangers to the constitution. So one's reflex action is to defend the constitution as it is and to not countenance changes in the constitution. And I think there is something important in a time when constitutionalism ought to be valued, when legality ought to be valued, to treat these as important places where we rally people. At the same time, the Constitution is in fact being developed. We have a constitutional court that was which was established as a basis for enriching our understanding of the Constitution. The meaning of a Constitution is not obvious. Now, with the United States Constitution, for example, the Supreme Court plays a continuous role of interpretation, which is very dynamic. And a man called Benjamin Cardozo said, the great generalities of the American Constitution have a meaning that change from age to age. Now, I'm not endorsing everything in the American Constitution, but the principle of changing the meaning of the Constitution, enriching its meaning, but in accordance with its spirit, is what the Constitutional Court in fact does. They declared that the death penalty was contrary to the Constitution. Now, that decision is itself something which is quite complex, because the Constitutional Court decision, if it were put to a referendum, lots of people have argued it would be voted down. So what we are saying really is that an unelected organ of the state, the Constitutional Court, has greater weight than the power of the people in this case, if they were to be asked their opinion. And this is a very difficult question. And the way I would approach it is to argue that when the Constitution was conceived, it was seen as necessary that you would allocate power to a professionally qualified judiciary to pronounce on some things on the basis of their professional expertise, and they were bound by the spirit of the Constitution, its Bill of Rights, and so forth, in the interpretations that they made. Consequently, the doctrine of the separation of powers means we need to accept that the legislature that is elected by the people, the executive and the judiciary are autonomous of one another. They are related to one another, but we need to respect the professional power of the judiciary to make such pronouncements. It does pose a problem in terms of its relationship to democracy, especially when we do believe that a popular or a referendum would have it thrown out. But I think that's part of life.
Thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking about South Africa's political scene.